Welcome to the next lesson in my Macros for Writers course. Today we're stepping up the utility meter a notch and we're going to look at making selections inside a macro. So what specifically are we going to do today? Well, I don't think it'll come as a surprise that as writers we spend a lot of time working with sentences. Unfortunately, a lot of times sometimes we're deleting sentences in our work. That's a necessary part of editing. And today I want to make that process faster. So today we'll create a macro called delete sentence test. Now, I append test because I have one of these and I don't want to overwrite mine. So we come down here to the record button on the status bar, click it, brings up my record macro dialog box. Now I've talked about these dialog boxes in a separate video in much more detail. So today I'm going a little bit faster. We're going to call this delete sentence test. Then I'll click the keyboard. Now this allows us to assign the keyboard shortcut right now as opposed to later. Now you can do it later, but the code is a little technical to look at. We'll do that in another day. So here we have the press new shortcut key edit box. I'm going to press Alt-Shift-Delete. And that's kind of what I like assigning it to. Using the Alt key for sentences. It doesn't always work that convenient, but that's the way I assign it. So I click Assign, and it then shows up in the Current Keys box on the left. So then I click Close. Now that's actually all I want. I just want the blank macro created so that I can then go in and put some code in it. Now I'm going to come down here and click Stop. So now I have my blank macro with a keyboard shortcut set. And that keyboard shortcut's really the focus here for me. So now we can use Alt F11 or Option F11 on a Mac and come over here to our VBA editor. Now I'm going to insert a blank line. And I've talked about a little bit of detail about this macro in a previous video. So I'm going to kind of just get to work here. So we've been working with the selection object. Now, a selection object, if you remember, is the, VBA encapsulation of the properties and actions that you can take with the selection. Now, in our document, it's literally what you selected or the cursor if there is no selection. In VBA, it contains a little more stuff that allows us to talk to Word about what we want to do with the selection. Now, the dot, if you remember, it allows me to refer to part of the selection, whether a property like the beginning or the end, or maybe an action. And we're going to do several actions with it today. So specifically, what we want to do is make the selection grow to cover the whole current sentence. Now, the command we use in VBA for that is actually the easiest one here. It's not the only one, but we can use expand. Now, that's going to tell it to grow the selection both ways if necessary and cover the whole unit, whatever unit I'm giving it. Now, the default is Word. That's obviously not what we want here. We want to tell it a sentence, expand to cover the whole sentence. And we've talked about these parameters before, even talked about this unit parameter. So we're telling it basically the step size. How big do we want to grow the selection? Now, that colon equals, that's just saying whatever constant I put here, store it in the unit step size for the expand command. Specifically, we're going to give it a sentence step size. Now don't worry about the WD in front of it. That's just a prefix to say this is a word constant for sentence step sizes. Now that's actually it for the expand. Now just a note on expand, it specializes in expanding to cover a whole unit. And if you try to run it again, it actually won't expand anymore. And so if you want to do more detailed work, you have to use some other commands. We'll get to some other commands later. Today, we want to delete the single current sentence. So that's actually perfect for this particular application. So what do we want to do here? We literally just want to delete it. So we come over here and create a new line, and we're still working with the selection. Selection dot, and we just want to delete it. So I literally type delete. Now, if you wanted, you could cut it to the clipboard. I prefer to just get rid of it if I know I want to get rid of it. I don't want to change the clipboard contents unless I know I want to change the clipboard, unless that's my plan to change the clipboard contents. Sometimes it's hard to avoid, but here I just want to delete it, so I'll leave it on delete. So that's really the basic function. We're done with the macro. Now there's a gotcha I'm going to go over in a little bit, but let's test this. Come over here to my document. You really should test your macros because sometimes it'll come back and bite you if you don't. But I come over here to my document, I pressed Alt-Shift-Delete, and boom, it deletes the whole sentence in one keystroke. Now I like that from an efficiency perspective. Just, I don't have to worry about selecting and pressing delete, just one keystroke and it's done. Now you may notice a straggling space there, or you may not have noticed it. I'm just kind of a perfectionist, so I kind of get a little aggravated at details like that. We could put another command in there to kind of delete that space, but then I don't want to delete a space in another circumstance, say a sentence in the middle of the paragraph. We're just going to take that as a kind of byproduct of this, and we can worry about that later when we learn some more things about writing macros. Now, I'm really surprised something like this is not a standard part of Word. I mean, Word has some kind of buried commands that allow you to select and jump between sentences, but they're not really front and center, especially not on the keyboard shortcut level. But I am glad that they included VBA so that we can kind of make Word work the way we want it to work. So what's that gotcha I mentioned? Basically, if you have a selection that spans, say, 2 sentences, maybe more than 2 sentences, and you come over here and you press Alt-Shift-Delete that we assigned it to, whoa, it deletes both sentences. Now, it's not horrible. It's not, tremendously inconsistent with the operation of the macro, but it is a little gotcha you got to be careful with. What if you accidentally make a selection and then it deletes more than you realize? Now, you might say, I just remember how it works, or I made it, so I know it does that. But 6 months, 8 months down the road, you may not think about it until it's too late. And it's not a major thing. The chances of something happening is small, but we'd like the macro to act how we expect it to act basically every time. And that's not to say that you fix every little detail, because sometimes the tiny mistake is not worth it. Kind of like that extra space at the end of the paragraph earlier. That's not worth our time right now. So how do we fix that? We basically want to get rid of a selection if it already exists. How do we do that in code? Well, we use Alt F11 to go back to our VBA editor, insert a new line above it, and we're still working with a selection object. So I type selection dot, and now there's an action in the selection that allows me to it's called collapse the selection. Literally just type collapse. So now if I come back here to my document and press my shortcut I assigned it to, Alt-Shift-Delete, boom, it only deletes the first paragraph. It collapsed the selection and then carried out the rest of the macro. There we go. We got the most important gotcha taken care of. There we collapse to the beginning of the selection. There is a way to specify collapsing to the end of the selection. I mean, most of the time we don't have to worry about that. Just the basic collapse will work where it collapses to the beginning, and we're fine. So I've used this actually in quite a few macros I've written, because I don't want to worry about what if there's a selection, what if there's not a selection. Now, sometimes you need a selection because you do something with it, but it's pretty common for me to put this at the top of my macro, so I know the rest of my macro commands, they start with a clean slate. So that's the functional part of this macro. I really don't have anything else to add to it. We can press Alt F11 to get back to our VBA editor. And other than adding a couple comments to explain it a little better, that's the basic macro. Now, my personal version, I add a little extra text to handle that trailing space, and I want mine to work naturally with dialogue text. So I have a little extra code in there to handle the double quotes from the dialogue text. But other than that, that really is the functional part of this macro. And you get a bonus macro today. Now, what I wanted to do is actually show you how you can then leverage these commands to do other things. So for example, what I want to do is show you how, now this is something I use a good bit too, is I may have an extra word at the beginning of the sentence. I'm bad about being verbose. You may notice that from some of my talking here, but I'll put like now, comma, and I want to get rid of that. Just chop it and learn to be a little more concise. So I created a shortcut to delete the first word of a sentence and capitalize the new first word. Now, it may sound dubious, but I use this more than I thought I would. And like I said, I hope you don't get sick of hearing me say that, but there's a bunch of these that I wrote that I'm like, man, it didn't seem like that big of a deal, but I find myself, wow, I can do that. And I use it quite a bit more than I thought I would. But you've heard that a few times right now, but hopefully you notice a pattern. This stuff is useful, so practice it. Put it in your toolbox and try it as you're writing. Train yourself to use those keyboard shortcuts, especially these new ones you're creating for yourself, and you will thank yourself. Okay, so how do we do this? We want to create a new macro. So I'm going to create a blank macro just like I did before, and press Alt F11 or Option F11 on a Mac to get over here to my macro. I'll create my new line. But like I said, it uses the expand command, so selection.expand. All right, and we're going to do the same thing. We want to delete the first word of a sentence. So we want to expand it to cover the current sentence just like before. And now we want to delete the first word. So we've got the selection, it's expanded to the whole sentence. Oh, just realized we better add that collapse command just to make sure. So now what do we want to do? We want to delete the first word. So here we go. We've got the selection. So we type selection and we want to refer to the first word. Now, just like in the first lesson, we talked about the paragraphs property. Well, here we all are going to access the words that are in the selection. And then I want the first word. So we type first. Now, we did this similar on the first lesson when we were deleting the first paragraph. So here I'm moving a little faster. Delete the first word. And then now, unfortunately, there's a little discontinuity with how Word handles paragraphs and how Word handles words and sentences. Now, they both have a little collection of all of them that are contained in the selection, but the paragraphs are kind of their own thing in VBA, whereas words and sentences are just a range of text. And so here, we literally just want to delete that first word. And that's it. That's all we need to do to delete that first word. Now, of course, that's not all I want to do here. It would be kind of annoying if I constantly then had to go to the beginning of the sentence and capitalize that first word. In fact, it would kind of defeat the whole point of the macro if I had to do that, because I could just delete the word when I got there and it was just simply a keystroke. So we want to tell the selection to go ahead and capitalize that first word for us. So we say selection. Now this is we have to refer to the whole selection. Now in this case, the selection is collapsed when we deleted it, but I'm not so worried about that detail right now. But we'll say everything in the selection, so that's the range, and then we'll talk about ranges more in kind of like later, and this coming up soon, but later. We're not to that yet. But selection range, and I want to change the case. So we want to change the case to, for us, we just have one little, actually a character at this point because it's collapsed, but one little bit to selection, so the distinction between the different types of cases doesn't matter for us. So we're going to use WD title sentence. Now, since there's only one sentence related to the selection now, that's going to capitalize the first word of that sentence. So we come back here, let's test this. Let's test this on this first paragraph here. I said Control-Alt-W. Boom, it deletes the first word and capitalizes the second, just like I wanted. Now I'm going to undo that because I don't want to change this document. Now you may notice that the cursor jumped to that. My personal version actually uses another method where I don't have to even move the cursor. I kind of prefer that. But right now this is what we know, so we're using the selection object to do everything. So for the final version, we'll press Alt F11. Now I added a few extra comments, as you see me do if you've watched a couple of the previous videos. I do have an extra note down here. You might have felt like you should, before you capitalize that first word, use the title case, that you should re-expand it. Turns out it doesn't matter here, so it's kind of redundant. So I added a comment to that, but I left a command in there commented out just for that clarity if I ever were to come back, or you ever were to come back and look at this. But it's really, that command that macro is just those basic steps we already coded. So there we go. I love the efficiency boost I can get with VBA, making Word, customizing Word to do things my way, to save me those keystrokes. And those keystrokes, believe it or not, they do add up. If you ever do a test, use the mouse and do something, then use that keyboard shortcut, you'll see there's a difference. And those seconds add up to minutes and hours. So I have two exercises for you today. The first one is to write a macro to duplicate, not delete, not cut, duplicate the current paragraph. Now I actually assigned mine to Control-Shift-D, kind of in similarity to Control-Shift-C for copy. And I can't say I use that one as much as I use some of the others, but it's really nice when I need it. Just Control-Shift-D, it duplicates it, and I can make whatever smaller changes I need. It saves me from having to go to the mouse and select, or it just saves me a few steps. And the second exercise is to write a macro that swaps two words. Now we'll actually use this more so as a setup for swapping two sentences later. That takes a little more machinery, a little more tools that we don't have access to right now. But write a macro that takes two words and swaps them either to the right or to the left. You pick. I actually have both ways written for myself, and I do actually occasionally use it. So I'll have some hints and solutions on my Patreon account. You can check the description down below if you want to go there and look at that. Some of it will be freely available. Some of it will be for my patrons. Thank you to those that support me. I appreciate it very much so. So that's it. Thank you for spending time learning with me today. I very much appreciate it. If you're interested in more, I'll have the next lesson in the series up here and maybe a random video this way. Thank you for spending time with me today, and I will see you in another video.